Sovereign citizens are those who disclaim any authority by the government over them based on their own purported personal sovereignty. The sovereign authority that they're talking about is the authority that governments have to make and enforce laws for their citizenry. The belief that this authority does not apply to them leads to frequent encounters between sovereign citizens and the criminal justice system. During the criminal justice process, from traffic stops through jury trials, sovereigns argue this ideology as a defense against their prosecution for the crimes they're accused of committing and against the jurisdiction of the courts to preside over their cases at all. Now, there is no universal dogma or manifesto defining the sovereign citizen ideology. Its adherents belong to different groups and subgroups that have varying beliefs about why the laws don't apply to them, and they rely on different legal and historical documents and events as justification for those views. However, there are some common themes that come up again and again in cases involving sovereign citizens, and so in this video I'm going to walk through a few of the most commonly held sovereign citizen beliefs, the arguments that they make in support of those beliefs, and the problems with those arguments. At the end, I'll talk about the consequences of making those arguments in court. So what are these beliefs? Well, let's start with the belief that you don't need a license to drive an automobile on public highways or streets. So sovereign citizens argue that they don't need a license to drive on public roads because they have a fundamental right to interstate travel. And that actually is true. The United States has decided in Supreme Court cases that its citizens do have a fundamental right to interstate travel. And that comes from a 1966 United States Supreme Court case called U.S. versus Guest. Now, what the word interstate travel means is travel between states. So Georgia, for example, can't prevent one of its residents from traveling to California, and vice versa. But what this right does not have anything to do with is the mode of travel. So you have a fundamental right to travel interstate, but you do not have a fundamental right to travel interstate specifically by airplane, car, train, or boat. And your fundamental right to interstate travel has nothing to do with intrastate travel, which is travel within a single state. And states are allowed to pass any law that they see fit in any areas where the federal government has not passed its own laws or otherwise prohibited state action on that area. Now that comes from the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and in Colorado, where I practice, the state legislature has done so in the area of requiring a driver's license by passing a law which mandates that any individuals operating a motor vehicle on public highways and roads in this state have a license. That's set forth in Title 42, Article 2, Part 1 of the Colorado Revised Statutes. It's CRS 422101. Belief number 2, that American courts are operating under admiralty law. Sovereign citizens argue that courthouses in America operate under admiralty law, which is the law of the sea and international commerce, and that therefore they lack jurisdiction over these individuals. Well, jurisdiction is the power of a court to hear and decide cases involving violations of the substantive criminal law, and to impose punishment upon conviction. Now, their argument is that at some point in the past, it's unclear exactly which point, they have different arguments about this, but their argument is that at some point, popular sovereignty, which is the sovereignty which is vested in citizens of a country rather than a monarch, that sovereignty was abandoned in favor of admiralty law. In support of this, sovereigns point to the fact that many courthouses in America fly a United States flag which has gold fringes on it, which they argue is somehow evidence of maritime jurisdiction. Now, the supreme and superseding law in American courts comes from the United States Constitution and the decisions made by the United States Supreme Court interpreting the Constitution. Other laws passed by Congress in the states are passed under the authority granted to these bodies by the U.S. Constitution, and that has been the case in this country since the Constitution was ratified in 1788. It has never been abandoned. Gold fringes on American flags is a feature that the Army added in 1835 to the American flags that it flies. Other military units and governments also frequently fly flags with that feature as well. It's decoration. There are no cases attributing any kind of legal significance to the fringes on a flag in an American courthouse, and lawsuits filed on this basis have been deemed as frivolous. Belief number 3. There is some distinction between a person's corporate self and their individual self. Sovereign citizens argue that Americans are given a corporate identity when they're born, and that this is a distinct and different identity from their true identity. As evidence for this, they point to the use of all capital letters by hospitals and state agencies when spelling out a person's name on official forms such as birth certificates, driver's license forms, and court documents. They argue that their true flesh and blood identity is different from this because it includes lowercase letters. And when they're prosecuted in court, sovereign citizens argue that the prosecution is being conducted against their corporate identity and not their true individual identity. Now, simply put, the laws in this country do not recognize corporate identities for individual persons. There is a requirement that prosecutors prove the identity of the person they've accused of a crime at trial, but this doesn't require navigating through old birth records and checking the capitalization and font size of someone's name. It's normally just done by simply having a witness point to the person in court and identify them by an article of clothing. So what are the consequences then of making these arguments in court? Well, I've seen a lot of people over the years come in and out of courtrooms and make these arguments, and they're always unsuccessful. And the issue isn't just that these arguments don't work. Criminal courts are an adversarial proceeding. Someone wins and someone loses in every single criminal trial. There are plenty of arguments made in cases in court that don't work. But when people adopt the sovereign citizen view, they make their situation much worse than it would otherwise be. Sovereigns sit in jail, unable to post bond because they won't sign a protection order. They violate court orders and end up getting sanctioned for contempt of court, and they forgo legitimate defenses to their cases in order to spew conspiracy theories that cause the jurors overseeing their trial to roll their eyes and then convict them. Now, nothing that I'm saying is going to matter to the sovereign citizens who are posting articles online and citing to the Magna Carta. But I would appeal to those who have read those articles and are wondering if they should be making an argument about their right to travel at their next speeding ticket hearing. If you want to know what the law actually is, start here. Read the statute that you're charged with and the cases that interpret it. At the end of the day, that's all lawyers really do. It'll show you what the DA has to prove in order to convict you at trial. It'll give you an idea of what your defense might be. And it also happens to be the same book that your judge will be reading, which will get you a lot further than making an issue about your name having lowercase letters in it. My name is Austin Lux. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I practice in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I want you to know your rights and the law.